The air was thick with grief as we stood in the chapel. Rain tapped lightly on the stained glass windows, a somber rhythm echoing our thoughts. My name is Evelyn Hart, and I had just lost my father, Richard Hart, a man who was my hero for as long as I could remember. He'd been everything to me, strong, wise, always present. So when he passed suddenly from a heart attack, the ground beneath my feet disappeared. But even as I tried to grieve, something felt off. The way people glanced at me. The way my stepmother, Margot, avoided eye contact. Even my half-brother Chase, usually so kind, barely acknowledged me. At the front of the chapel, Margot stood rigid, gripping the folded American flag they handed her, even though Dad had always joked he was too stubborn for the military. Chase looked straight ahead, his jaw clenched. I sat alone. I thought maybe it was grief, or maybe I had somehow offended them. But when the service ended and I walked outside to breathe, I overheard something that would shatter my world. "She won't get a cent," Margot hissed to someone on the phone, hidden by the large oak tree near the parking lot. "Richard never filed the adoption. She's not his blood. This will be easy." I froze. Adoption? Not his blood? I backed away before she noticed me, heart racing, ears ringing. I had always believed Richard Hart was my biological father. He raised me since I was a baby. My mother, who passed when I was 6, told me nothing different. I drove home in a daze, memories flashing like old photographs, Dad teaching me to ride a bike, clapping at my piano recital, dancing with me at prom. How could I not be his child? But Margot had never accepted me. After she married Dad when I was 11, she always kept me at arm's length. I thought it was just stepmother stuff. Now, I wondered if it was more. The next day, I visited Aunt Claire, Dad's younger sister. She was the only family member I trusted completely. "Evelyn," she said as she hugged me tight, "you look pale. Are you okay?" I told her everything, what I overheard, what Margot said. Her face stiffened. "Sweetheart. Your mom and dad had some struggles when you were born. I never asked details, but yes, there were rumors you were adopted." "Rumors?" I whispered. "I always thought it didn't matter. Richard loved you like his own, more than anything. But it did matter now. Because apparently, it might mean I would be left with nothing." 3 days later, I received a formal invitation to the will reading at Dad's attorney's office. I arrived early, clutching a folder in my bag. Inside was something I'd ordered overnight, a DNA test I had done months ago for fun. Back then, it had been about learning my heritage. Now, it might be the only thing saving me. Margot and Chase arrived 5 minutes before the meeting. Margot's lips curled into a smug smile when she saw me. Chase nodded stiffly, not meeting my eyes. The lawyer, Mr. Donnelly, opened the meeting with the usual formalities, then began to read. "To my beloved wife, Margot, I leave our house on Willow Creek Lane, all its contents, and the joint bank accounts." I saw Margot's smile widen. "To my son, Chase, I leave the lake house, my personal investment account, and my vintage car collection." Chase's eyebrows lifted, satisfied. Then the lawyer paused, his expression unreadable. "And to Evelyn Hart." Everyone turned toward me. Margot scoffed under her breath. "If it is proven beyond doubt that she is my biological daughter, she shall inherit the remaining estate, including a trust fund of $1.2 million, stocks, and my private art collection." The room went silent. My heart dropped. So he did doubt it. Margot leaned forward. "Well, then. I guess that settles it. She's not your daughter. She doesn't get anything." "Actually," I said, pulling the folder from my bag, hands shaking slightly, "I came prepared." I slid the printed report across the table. According to this DNA test, Richard Hart was indeed my biological father. A 99.9% match. Taken months before his death. Margot's face drained of color. Chase looked stunned. Mr. Donnelly examined the paper carefully, then nodded. "This appears legitimate. If confirmed, the terms of the will stand." I sat back, breathing for the first time in what felt like hours. But the war wasn't over, not even close. Because what Margot did next would blow the entire situation wide open. I could feel Margot's fury like static in the room. She glared at the DNA report Mr. Donnelly held, her fingers twitching like she wanted to rip it from his hands. "This doesn't prove anything," she snapped. "It could be fake. She probably printed it from one of those mail-order websites. My husband wouldn't have trusted a piece of paper over his family." "Margot," the lawyer said firmly, Evelyn's report is from an accredited lab. And unless you can present evidence to dispute it, the will stands. Her jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. Chase, sitting beside her, looked pale and confused. He'd always been quiet, but now he seemed unsure which side to be on. "I don't care what the paper says," Margot hissed under her breath as she stood. "She's not family. She's a mistake." With that, she stormed out of the room. Chase followed, casting me one last look, a strange mix of pity and guilt, before disappearing down the hall. Mr. Donnelly turned to me, voice softening. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. This shouldn't have played out like that." I nodded slowly. "It's okay. Honestly, I think it's been playing out like that for years." He handed me a copy of the will and explained the next steps for processing the inheritance. I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, not just from what had happened, but from what it meant. My father had loved me enough to leave me something significant, but he had also doubted I was truly his. Why? Why hadn't he just asked me or told me the truth? That night, I returned to my father's old study, now mine. The house was technically Margot's until the transfer cleared, but she'd moved into a hotel in a fit of rage. Probably plotting something. I ran my fingers across the spines of the books in his library. So many memories. I sat down in his old leather chair and noticed something I hadn't before, a small key taped underneath the desk drawer. Curious, I took it and checked every drawer. The third one opened with a click. Inside was a weathered black envelope with my name on it, in Dad's handwriting. I hesitated, then opened it. "Dear Evelyn," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've passed. And there is a chance you've discovered things I never had the courage to tell you. I failed you in that way. I let doubt, fear, and regret cloud what should have been simple, loving you without question." I swallowed hard, already blinking back tears. "There was a time when I didn't know if you were mine. Your mother. She had secrets. Things I didn't understand until much later. But I raised you because from the moment I held you, you were my daughter. Blood or not, I never stopped believing that in my heart." My hands shook as I read the final lines. "I hope the truth hasn't hurt you more than it's helped. But I want you to know, if there was any justice left in me, it was meant for you. Always. Dad." I sat in the silence for what felt like an hour. That letter. It was everything. It didn't erase the pain, but it proved his love wasn't a lie. Later that week, as I was sorting boxes in the attic, I heard the front door slam. I froze. Footsteps echoed below. I crept down, heart pounding. At the foot of the stairs stood Margot, dressed in black, her expression twisted in cold fury. "This house is still mine until the legal transfer clears," she said with a smug smile. "I'm just collecting some personal items." "Fine," I said cautiously. "Just don't break anything." She didn't respond. Instead, she walked directly into the study. I followed. "You've always been good at playing the innocent one," she said, looking around the room like it offended her. "But I know the truth. You were never supposed to be part of this family." I didn't respond. Arguing would only make her worse. Then she did something I didn't expect. She walked over to the bookshelf, pulled out a volume of poetry, and pressed something behind it. With a mechanical click, a hidden panel popped open. "What is that?" I asked. Margot ignored me and reached inside. She pulled out a small steel box. My pulse raced. I hadn't known there was a hidden safe behind the shelf. She opened the box, rifling through it, and froze. Her face turned white. I stepped closer and saw what was inside, several envelopes labeled with names. And a thumb drive. She turned toward me like a cornered animal. "These don't belong to you." I stood firm. If they were in my father's study, and they were locked away, maybe they do. Suddenly, she shoved past me and ran toward the door. I chased her down the hall. "Margot, stop," I shouted. She yanked open the front door, and ran right into Chase. His eyes widened in shock. "Mom? What are you doing?" She froze, holding the box behind her. "I could ask you the same," he said. Then he turned to me. "Evelyn, what's going on?" "She broke in," I said, panting. "She found a hidden safe in Dad's study." Chase glanced at the box in her hands. "Let me see it." "No," she snapped. "You don't understand what's at stake." But Chase, taller and stronger, gently took the box from her. He opened it and looked inside. His expression slowly changed. "What are these?" he whispered. I stepped forward. "I think they're letters. Maybe evidence. Maybe more secrets." We both looked at Margot, who now leaned against the doorframe, defeated. "You should read them," she said softly, voice shaking. "But once you do, everything changes." Chase stood there frozen, the metal box heavy in his hands. We were in the foyer, and the silence between us was so thick it pressed against my chest. Margot leaned against the wall, her face pale, lips tightly drawn. For once, she wasn't yelling. She wasn't scheming. She looked afraid. "Let's go into the study," I said quietly. Chase nodded and followed me. Margot trailed behind like a ghost. We sat at the large mahogany desk where Dad used to read contracts and balance budgets. Chase opened the box and started pulling out the envelopes one by one. Each was labeled in my father's unmistakable handwriting. There was one for me. One for Chase. One for Margot. A few more were labeled with names I didn't recognize: Elaine, Derek, Natalie. And then there was the thumb drive. Chase looked at the envelopes like they might explode. "Do we read them?" I reached for mine. The paper was heavy and worn. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. "Evelyn," it began. "If you've found this, then you've likely already uncovered part of the truth. There's more. Much more. And I owe you all of it." He detailed a story I wasn't prepared for. Years ago, my mother, his first wife, Lila, had confessed to an affair. She didn't tell him who the man was, only that there was a chance I wasn't his biological child. My father was shattered, but when he held me as a baby, he chose to raise me as his daughter anyway. "I tried to let it go," he wrote. "But your stepmother never did. Margot found out, and she used it against you. Against me. She always resented you, not because of who you are, but because she saw you as a threat to her perfect little family." Tears blurred my vision. My chest ached with a strange mixture of grief and vindication. Dad continued, explaining that after years of suspicion, he secretly ordered a DNA test. The results confirmed I was indeed his biological daughter. He never told anyone, not even me, because by then, the damage had been done. Margot had poisoned the air between us, and guilt kept him silent. "I left you the inheritance," he concluded, "not out of pity, but because it's rightfully yours. My blood, my legacy. My love. I hope you forgive me." I looked up and saw Chase reading his own letter, eyes darting back and forth. His face went pale, and then red. "My dad," he said, voice cracking. "He said he suspected Mom had an affair too. With one of his business partners. He was never sure if I was really his." My breath caught. Margot let out a gasp. "No, no, that's not true." He was angry, suspicious. But he had no proof. He was jealous. Chase turned to her, holding the letter like a blade. "But you never denied it, did you? Not to him. Not even now?" She swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking. "Mom," Chase whispered. "Am I even his son?" She collapsed into the leather chair behind her, face buried in her hands. "I don't know," she said hoarsely. "I thought it didn't matter. I loved your father. I loved you. I thought if I just pretended hard enough, it would all go away." Silence. A thick, awful silence. Chase stood slowly and walked to the window, the letter still crumpled in his hand. "I always wondered why he was distant," he said. "I thought it was just him. But maybe he didn't know how to love me because he was too afraid." Margot looked up. "Chase, please." "No," he said quietly. "Don't. Just don't." I turned to the last piece of the puzzle, the thumb drive. We found Dad's old laptop in the drawer, powered it up, and inserted the drive. A folder appeared titled "If Found." Inside were scanned documents, old photos, emails, and a video file. I clicked on the video. Dad appeared on screen, older, wearing his favorite navy sweater. He looked tired, but kind. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I've already passed. And I'm sorry, for all of it. For the silence. For the fear. For letting doubt ruin what should have been the most beautiful parts of our lives." He spoke directly to the camera, and somehow, it felt like he was speaking only to me. "To Evelyn, my daughter, always. You were the light of my life, even when I failed to show it." He paused, voice cracking. "To Chase, I wish I could say with certainty you were mine. But DNA doesn't matter. You're my son in every way that counts. I just hope I gave you enough." And then, looking directly into the camera. "To Margot. I loved you once. But you let bitterness turn to cruelty. You turned my children against each other. You used secrets as weapons. That's why I wrote the will the way I did. Not out of revenge, but to finally do what's right. He leaned back in the chair. If you three can find a way forward, together, that would be my true legacy. The screen went dark. None of us spoke for a long time. I could barely breathe. Chase finally broke the silence. I need time, he said quietly, to process all this. He left the room, walking slowly, like the weight of his entire life had just changed. Margot sat there, alone, staring into the distance. What now? She asked in a whisper. I stood. Now? I honor his wishes. I rebuilt what he left behind. Whether you're part of it or not, is up to you. And I walked away. 3 days passed after we read the letters. The estate was quiet, eerily so. Chase hadn't come back. Margot barely left her room. And I spent most of my time in the study, sorting through paperwork, legal documents, and old memories tucked into dusty boxes. Dad had left everything to me. The company, the estate, the stocks, the house, every last asset. The will was airtight, and Margot knew it. She hadn't contested it, at least not yet. But I felt the tension in the air like a storm waiting to hit. The only time she appeared was when the lawyer came to finalize the transfer of the property title. You don't have to stay here, I said as she walked past me, signing papers without a word. You can move into one of the condos Dad owned in Naples. It's fully furnished. You'd be comfortable. She didn't look up. Is that your version of mercy? No, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's what he would have wanted. He didn't hate you, Margot. He just wanted the truth to come out. Her eyes met mine. And what will you do with the truth, Evelyn? Frame it on the wall? I said nothing. There was no point arguing with someone who'd built a kingdom out of secrets. That evening, I received a call from Chase. Can we meet? He asked. His voice was different, calmer, but cautious. Of course. We met the next morning at our father's favorite diner. It hadn't changed in 20 years. The same red booths, the same waitress who always smelled like cinnamon and hairspray. Chase slid into the seat across from me. He looked tired, but clearer somehow, like a fog had lifted. I got a DNA test, he said before even touching his coffee. My stomach tightened. And? He let out a long breath. I'm not his biological son. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm sorry, Chase. He gave a small, bitter laugh. You know what's crazy? I think I always knew. I just didn't want it to be true. I squeezed his hand. That doesn't change how much he cared about you. You heard him in the video. You were his son. Always. He looked away. I want to believe that. You should. We sat in silence for a moment, the clatter of plates and soft music filling the space between us. Then he asked, so what now? You own everything. Where does that leave me? I straightened up. You're still my brother, Chase. Nothing about this, none of it, was your fault. And I want you involved. In the company, the house, everything. If you want to be. He stared at me, unsure. I'll draw up an agreement, I continued. We'll split the business ownership 50-50. Dad raised us both. I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't matter. His eyes watered. You don't have to do that. I want to. And I meant it. Not because of guilt or obligation, but because it was the only way forward that felt right. When we walked out of the diner together, the morning sun was warm and hopeful. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in it. Later that afternoon, I returned to the estate to find Margot waiting for me in the sitting room. She was dressed immaculately, as always, but her eyes were bloodshot. You gave him half, she said without preamble. I nodded. He deserves that much. She let out a bitter chuckle. You're so much like your father. Always trying to fix things. I'm not trying to fix you, Margot, I said. That's something you have to do yourself. She looked at me for a long time. I did love him, you know. Your father. Maybe not perfectly. Maybe not even well. But I loved him. I nodded. Then maybe it's time to honor that love in a different way. Let go of the bitterness. Let go of this house. Of the past. She tilted her head, as if considering it. You know, when I first met him, he was the most honest man I'd ever known. It scared me. Because I wasn't. There it was, her first real admission. Not an apology, not quite. But something close. I'll move to the condo, she said quietly. And I won't contest the will. Thank you, I replied. As she stood to leave, she turned back one last time. He would have been proud of you, Evelyn. Even if he never found the words to say it. I watched her walk away, her heels echoing through the hall like a soft goodbye. The next few days moved quickly. Legal transfers, board meetings, press announcements about the leadership shift in the family company. Some shareholders were skeptical of me taking over. Others were relieved Margot wouldn't be in charge. I leaned into it with everything I had. Not to prove I was worthy, but because I was tired of running from who I was. For the first time, I felt grounded. Rooted. Seen. Chase moved into the guest house temporarily. We started spending time together again, talking, remembering childhood stories, laughing at the old videos Dad had left on the thumb drive. One evening, we sat on the back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. Chase handed me a small, velvet box. "What's this?" I asked. "Dad's cufflinks," he said. "The ones he wore every time he signed something important." I opened the box. The gold cufflinks sparkled in the fading light. "He wanted you to have them," Chase added. I found them in his closet, with a note. It said, "For Evelyn, when she finally takes the lead." Tears welled in my eyes. "Guess it's official now," I whispered. "Yeah," he said with a smile. "It is." 6 months had passed since I officially took over the company. At first, everything felt like treading water in a storm: shareholder meetings, press interviews, restructured departments. I barely had time to sleep, let alone grieve. But slowly, something changed. I found a rhythm. Not my father's, not Margot's, mine. And through it all, Chase was there. He returned to the company gradually. He didn't want a fancy title or a corner office. Instead, he took over the foundation Dad had quietly built over the years, one that provided scholarships, housing assistance, and mentorship for underprivileged youth. Chase was good at it. Better than good. It gave him purpose, a way to carry on Dad's values in his own way. One late afternoon, I walked into the boardroom to find a box on the table. No note, no label. Just a black, leather box with an old family crest etched in gold. Inside was a single photograph, faded and delicate. It was of my father. Young, maybe early 20s. He was standing in front of a hardware store, smiling, holding a toolbox in one hand and a baby, me, in the other. There was something raw in that photo. No suits. No money. Just a man and his child, full of hope. Tucked behind the photo was a handwritten note in his unmistakable script. Evelyn. If you're reading this, then you already know everything. The lies, the truths, the heartbreak. I built this empire not for wealth, but for legacy. Not the kind etched in stone, but the kind carried in hearts. If you've chosen to lead with honesty, then I know I've left it in the right hands. Love always. Dad. Tears streamed down my face. Not from sadness, but from peace. For the first time in years, I felt his presence not in his absence, but in the life I was building. In the choices I was making. 2 weeks later, I hosted a company-wide dinner at the estate. It wasn't a lavish gala. It was a backyard barbecue, complete with string lights, a jazz trio, and trays of homemade food. I wanted the staff, from interns to executives, to feel something real, something human. Near the end of the evening, I tapped a glass with a spoon. "Can I have a moment of your time?" I said. The chatter died down as everyone turned to me. I stood on the back steps, looking out at the people who had kept this company going through thick and thin. "My father believed in legacy," I began. "But I think, for a long time, we misunderstood what that meant. We thought it meant numbers, market shares, buildings with his name etched into glass." I paused. "But legacy is not what we leave behind. It's what we build in others. The impact we make when no one's watching. The values we pass on, not through speeches, but through actions." I looked at Chase, who stood near the grill, smiling. "We've been through a lot this year. Loss, change, revelations none of us expected. But what I've learned is this: truth, even when it's painful, frees us. It gives us room to heal. To grow. To lead differently." I raised my glass. To truth. To growth. And to the kind of legacy worth leaving. Everyone raised their glasses in return, and for a moment, under those glowing lights and soft music, I felt like my father was right there with us. 1 month later, Margot sent me a letter. No return address. No dramatic handwriting. Just a plain envelope. Inside was a simple note. "Evelyn. I've sold the condo and moved abroad. I won't be coming back. Thank you for not turning your back on Chase. He needed someone to believe in him. I couldn't do that. You could. You did. Don't waste your life being angry at me. It won't change what I did. Live better than I did. Margot. I read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it in the same drawer that held Dad's old note. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need to. Margot was gone. Her chapter was closed. And mine? Mine was just beginning. The next season came quickly. Fall settled in with crisp air and golden leaves. Chase and I established a new company policy: every executive had to spend 1 day each quarter volunteering through the foundation. It wasn't about PR. It was about reconnecting with the world outside the boardroom. Remembering why we did what we did. One evening, Chase knocked on my office door. "I found something," he said, holding up a dusty journal. We sat down together and opened it. It was Dad's. Inside were pages of sketches, business plans from the early years, motivational quotes, and thoughts scribbled in the margins. One line was underlined twice. "Success is not measured by what we own, but by who we lift." Chase smiled. "Sounds like something you'd say." Maybe he said it first. We sat in silence for a while, just reading. 2 siblings. 2 survivors. 2 pieces of a story we'd spent a lifetime trying to understand. That night, I stood in the garden, the moonlight casting soft shadows across the stone path. I thought of everything that had happened, the secrets, the test, the fallout. But I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt rebuilt. Stronger. Wiser. Ready.